Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1097 just came out, and we are continuing with what is shaping up to be, in my opinion, maybe one of, if not the best backstories in One Piece, simply because not only is Kuma's story very tragic, but he is turning out to be maybe the most kind-hearted character in the entire story so far. And that's saying a lot because we've met a lot of really big-hearted, very altruistic characters throughout One Piece, but Kuma might seriously take the cake. So we saw not only from his start, obviously as a slave, and what he did for all the other slaves, and how he regretted not being able to save even more people, what we're seeing now as an adult is Kuma's most important ability is turning out not just to be the Hands of Liberation, which can free people, but his ability to take pain of others onto himself. And that fits a lot with the idea of Kuma that's emerging, right? We saw that he's very much a man of God right from the beginning, always carrying around a Bible. Now we see a greater association with the church with Kuma and religion, and a lot of this could be tying back to the idea of taking the sins of others upon oneself, you know, the idea of Jesus dying on the cross for others. Kuma seems to be shaping up to follow that sort of idea, right? Because every Sunday, what's he doing? He's taking the pain, the exhaustion, the illnesses, the ailments of innocent civilians throughout the land upon himself. And the most important thing, and this is one of Oda's favorite tropes to fall back on, his favorite little ideas, is doing it without ever letting anybody know that he is doing this for them, right? This is one of Oda's favorite ideas throughout One Piece. We saw this, of course, with Zoro's Nothing Happened, but then we see it recurring throughout the story with, for example, Oden dancing for 5 years, basically taking the pain, the burden of Wano's citizens upon himself, you know, humiliating himself, degrading himself for the sake of them being kept safe. Kuma is just another example of that, and it's funny because it ties back to, you know, the very first scene that we saw this idea invoked in One Piece with Zoro's Nothing Happened, the very same ability that Kuma used to set up that scene of taking out the exhaustion, the pain, and the damage and the suffering of one individual so that somebody else could silently take it, in that case Zoro. It turns out that that was a setup for us learning that that is the truth of Kuma's character himself and what he's been doing throughout the entire story of One Piece, and throughout his entire life really, from childhood all the way up to adulthood. And it fits more so with what we know of Kuma now, and once he's moved past the era where he was, you know, the savior of Sorbet Kingdom and everything like that, because now we understand that just as Kuma was literally taking the pain and suffering of others onto himself silently without anybody ever knowing, back in the day, and he was doing that literally, ever since he started going through these cyborg modifications, he was basically fighting a battle where he was most likely having to protect others that didn't know that he was making this sacrifice. We know that Dragon didn't know what he was doing, we didn't know that Ivankov didn't know what he was doing, we know that even Bonnie, his own child, did not know why he was doing this. But we do know that his motivations are always altruistic and always self-sacrificial, so he was hiding something the entire time from his friends, from his family, and even, of course, from the Straw Hat Pirates, who Kuma, in his last act, he decided to save. The last moment that he had of basically normal consciousness, he chose to save the Straw Hats so that they could do more and help people in the future, which yet again goes to the idea of Kuma making a sacrifice himself without others really knowing that he's making some sort of a sacrifice. I mean, to this day, the Straw Hats don't really know what Kuma did for them. They just understand vaguely that he must have been helping them somehow, but at the time, Kuma just seemed like a bad guy. And Kuma really did earn that reputation of being this tyrant all those years, when in reality, again, he was taking people's pain upon himself, he was helping people, he was liberating people, so on and so forth. So the idea of Kuma as a character that's shaping up really does seem to be the most saint-like character in the entire story. A true saint, not a celestial dragon type saint, but a true saint. And that just fits so much with the imagery of being a man of God, etc., that we were getting invoked for him from his very beginning. Initially, it seemed like it was something somewhat ironic, such a terrifying, powerful, dangerous Shichibukai, a real tyrant of the seas, etc., carrying around this Bible and acting like, you know, a saintly figure. But in reality, that was his true character all along. Kuma really is a saint in One Piece, for lack of a better term. So in this chapter, beyond the greater understanding of Kuma and everything that he stands for, we obviously got to see more of Kuma's dynamic with Ginny, which is a fun dynamic to read. I get the sense that Ginny is a little bit like Nami in the sense that she is a good-hearted person, but she can be very abrasive and snappy with people when they're not really getting the full picture. And she's got a quick, short temper, even though her heart is in the right place. So I'm liking Ginny quite a bit. I think Kuma and Ginny, with that very soft-hearted character in Kuma and that very sharp, fiery character in Ginny, I think they make a great pair. So I think that this pair, I guess, being the centerpiece of the tragedy that we're really going to get at the tail end of Kuma's life that might be around the corner in the very next chapter. I think that that is a very fitting dynamic to build the tragedy of this backstory around. we know throughout the story, obviously, you need these sort of duos for any tragic backstory, right? Like Chopper Hiruluk, Nami Bellemere, Law Corazon, etc. Losing somebody in some way, in some tragic event that really shapes the sadness of the story of the character, of the main character of the backstory, right? Ginny is, of course, not exactly a parental figure to Kuma, but she was sort of a big sister that turned into a romantic interest, which is, I guess you could say, the only romantic comparison we have as a tragic backstory was probably Kiros and Scarlet, but I think Ginny and Kuma is a dynamic that we're getting to see even more fleshed out than that, so I imagine that what's going to happen here is going to be even sadder. So next chapter, 1098, I imagine is going to be a very, very, very tragic one. Lastly, we have a little bit of lore around the Revolutionary Army. So we already knew that they started off as the quote-unquote freedom fighters, and I like the idea that initially they were that group because Oda could have just had them start off as being called the Revolutionary Army, but he chose to wait for that to evolve as a group into the Revolutionary Army once Kuma joined the forces. That way we kind of get the symbolism of Kuma being one of the founding members of the official Revolutionary Army, rather than somebody that just joined in a little bit later in the game. So I like the idea that part of the time that they transitioned from the Freedom Fighters to the Revolutionary Army, Kuma was a core component of that. So he, along with Ivankov and Dragon, was one of the main starting trio of the most important rebellion force in the entire world. And I really enjoy the vibe of the Revolutionary Army and some of the ideas that were explained here, which is Dragon and Ivankov and Kuma, they want it to be an army that is sort of unbound. So just the nature of the army, which we've seen, it's very spread out. You've got revolutionary forces in East Blue, in West Blue, in South Blue, in all of the blues in the Grand Line and the New World. They're all spread out across the world. And the idea for that is not just to incite revolutions everywhere that they possibly can, but they like the idea, it fits symbolically with the notion that the Revolutionary Army represents freedom, because the nature of how the army itself works is unbound, limitless freedom. Anywhere in the world you can start a revolution. The Revolutionary Army knows no borders. So I love that idea, and I love the feel that the Revolutionary Army, which once seemed like such a mysterious, ominous force, pre-Timeskip, we didn't really fully understand it. And now we understand that it's really just like a bigger version of the Straw Hat Pirates, right? That's just more dedicated towards actually freeing the world from the world government, but the actual core bonds and the dynamics between the characters at the center of it feels very much like a loving Straw Hat Pirate-esque crew. And the greater forces that they've got assembled throughout the world, well, I guess you could kind of view that as kind of the same way that the Straw Hats technically have a lot of forces scattered throughout the world, a lot of their own allies doing their own things, the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, but also just friends that they've made along the way at various islands that the Straw Hats could ultimately call upon should a time ever come for a big war or a big rebellion. But the Revolutionary Army obviously is much more active in trying to accomplish this day to day. So, love the idea of the Revolutionary Army. We only got to see a bit of Dragon here. I think Oda is saving more Dragon stuff for the future, but I just really enjoy the fact that we got to really understand at their core, they feel more like a loving family and a very tight-knit group of individuals, rather than a very serious sort of militant group like maybe the world government and the Marines initially phrased them as to us earlier on in the story. So, loving the backstory so far. I think the real meat and tragedy and drama and emotion of it is around the corner, so really looking forward to next chapter. And lastly, we have our Voice of the People, which is the top most voted submission from my top tier of patrons. So Big Al pointed out that we see all the notable moments of Kuma's life in this chapter between slavery and joining the Revolutionary Army, and we specifically don't see Bonnie being born about 24 years ago. Seems like a long shot, but what if Ginny is just Bonnie after getting her fruit and using distorted future on herself, and Kuma had to take her memory away for some reason in the next chapter? So I love this little theory that you brought up, because it adds a fourth possibility to what Bonnie's true nature might be. And one of my favorite aspects of this whole Kuma flashback is not just, the excellent character writing, lore reveals, and hype moments, but the ongoing mystery of who really is Jewelry Bonnie and what is her true relationship with Kuma. Because right now we had three possibilities before this. First was that Bonnie is actually a younger kid than we expected, and that she's born later in Kuma's flashback, and that she's just been using her age fruit to age herself up and appear older. Second is that Bonnie actually is already born in Kuma's flashback, and we haven't seen her, and she is the age that Oda estimated her to be, which is around 24 years old. Third is that she is a clone. This has been a popular theory that has been gaining some momentum, that she is a clone created by Vegapunk, and for all we know, Vegapunk could show up in the next couple chapters of Kuma's flashback. But you introduce a fourth possibility, and I love this possibility, that Bonnie is in fact Ginny herself, that got the fruit, aged herself back in some way, and whatever traumatic experience happened, Kuma actually had to remove the memories from her brain for some reason. I love this idea because this makes Bonnie such a complex character, because she would not in fact be who she thought she was. She would not be Jewelry Bonnie, she would in fact be Ginny, which gives her one of the most interesting internal character conundrums that we've ever had in One Piece. It just becomes a remarkably unique individual, and the path that she chooses to take, what her motivations would be after she found out or finds out the truth, and just the impact that she could have on the story, either by joining the Straw Hats, by joining the Revolutionaries, or doing her own thing. The possibilities are endless, but it would just make Bonnie so much more of an interesting character than she already is. So I'm really looking forward to the possibility that that prediction could be correct, that Bonnie could just be Ginny herself, just with age shenanigans and memory shenanigans involved. So looking forward to how the rest of Kuma's flashback plays out, and next chapter will likely be a very, very tragic one, so look out for 1098, and I will talk to you all next week.